There was a moment when the name Kanye West was synonymous with genius. It wasn't an opinion, it was almost a consensus. Critics praised him, artists sought him out, record labels needed him, and the public idolized him. He was the man who had changed rap without ever having lived on the streets. The producer who became a rapper, the rapper who became a designer, and the designer who ended up being such a massive cultural force that it was impossible to ignore him. But he is also the man who interrupted the Grammy Awards to tell the world he should have won. The one who jumped on stage at the MTV Awards and took the microphone from Taylor Swift in one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television. The one who said that African American slavery was a choice. The one who embraced Donald Trump and posed proudly in front of the cameras. The one who sold shirts with swastikas. The one who ran for president of the United States. The one who ended up living inside a stadium because he had nowhere else to go. And so the question many people ask is not who Kanye West is, but what happened to Kanye West? Because something changed. Or perhaps something was always there and simply took a very long time to come to light. And what came to light in 2026, with a post he wrote himself that shook half the internet, was a revelation that forces us to revisit his entire story from the beginning. Because many of the things we interpreted as arrogance, madness, or malice may have had an explanation that no one expected to find. This is the story of Kanye West. Not the summarized version, not the headlines. The full story. Omari West is born on June 8, 1977, in Atlanta, Georgia. And already in that detail, there is something that sets him apart from almost every other rapper of his generation. He does not grow up in poverty. He does not sell drugs to survive. He does not have to choose between the street and school because in his home there is stability, education, and structure. His mother, Donda West, holds a doctorate in education and is a university professor, a woman who promotes African American literature and mentors young writers. His father, Ray West, is one of the first African American photojournalists in the country, someone who has photographed figures like Ronald Reagan and Maya Angelou, and who, according to some sources, had ties to the Black Panthers, the movement that fought most fiercely against racism and police violence in the 1970s. So Kanye grows up between two worlds that coexist in his home in a perfectly natural way. On one side, the artistic, the creative, the literary. On the other, racial consciousness, pride, one's own voice. And both teach him the same thing, that you have to say what you think, that you must not ask permission to occupy the space you believe you deserve, and that silence is a form of defeat. When Kanye is 3 years old, his parents divorce. He stays with his mother, and although his father remains a presence in his life, the figure who shapes him from that point on is Donda. And the way Donda raises him is so intense, so focused on reinforcing his self-esteem and confidence, that over time some will wonder if it was, perhaps, too much. She tells him over and over how brilliant he is, how special he is, how valuable he is. She pushes him to express himself without filters and to have no fear of rejection. One day, when Kanye is just 6 or 7 years old, his teacher stops Donda at the school entrance and says, "Wow, he doesn't have any problems with his self-esteem, does he?" Donda takes it as a compliment and responds that no, he doesn't. But on the way home, the phrase keeps turning over in her mind. She wonders whether that was only a compliment or whether there was also something more behind it, a small, discreet warning that she chose not to hear. When they move to Chicago, to the South Side, something changes in Kanye's world. The South Side is one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city. Poverty, inequality, violence, and a street culture that rap had made its natural language. Kanye falls in love with that sound from the very first moment. He begins writing poems, building rhythms, imagining songs. But he soon discovers there is a problem. Many people in that world do not see him as one of their own. He comes from a stable family, has a mother who is a professor, and never had to fight to survive. In the rap of that era, that was almost a disqualification. That tension will follow him for a long time. The feeling of wanting to belong to a world that does not fully recognize him, of having to prove something that others do not have to prove. And that pressure, rather than paralyzing him, will push him to work harder than anyone else. At 10 years old, they temporarily move to China because Donda lands an academic position there. For a child that age, the experience is transformative. New cultures, new languages, new ways of seeing the world. When he returns to Chicago, Kanye is already a more curious, more open, and more hungry to learn person. And during that period back in Chicago, something happens that will mark the rest of his life. His mother obtains the contact of a local producer willing to listen to her son. That producer turns out to be No ID, a respected figure in Chicago hip-hop. He has no obligation to receive him, but he agrees. He listens to Kanye's first song, which is called Green Eggs and Ham, inspired by the Dr. Seuss children's book. It is not good, but No ID sees something in him. He gives him some advice, and Kanye goes home with those words etched in his head. From that point, he begins to practice with a discipline that surprises everyone. His songs keep improving, his ear keeps sharpening, and he also begins to show talent in visual art. He draws, he paints, he wins school competitions. Some of his works, years later, will be valued at more than $20,000. That aesthetic sensibility is not an accident. It is something that will permeate everything he does in the future, from his album covers to his fashion shows. When he finishes high school, he enrolls at the American Academy of Art in Chicago, but he soon realizes that the visual arts are not enough to say everything he has inside. His ideas are too many, too diverse, too loud. Music is the only form that contains them all, so he transfers to the university where his mother teaches to study English literature, but the academic pace frustrates him too. He cannot stand the idea of someone else telling him when to learn, and what for. He leaves college and tells Donda he wants to dedicate himself entirely to music. Donda, who has spent her entire life training young people, who understands the value of education better than anyone, does not stop him. She trusts him. And that decision, which almost any other mother would probably have blocked, ends up being the catalyst for everything that follows. From his bedroom, Kanye begins to build a sound of his own. The rap of that moment feels limited to him. On the East Coast, there are raw lyrics about the streets and violence. On the West Coast, money, parties, and luxury predominate. Both extremes seem interesting to him, but incomplete. Something deeper is missing, something more human, something that speaks to the fears and doubts that do not necessarily come from having survived the streets, but from having grown up in the modern world with all its contradictions. So he does something that at the time few people were doing with that precision. He goes back to the soul music of the 1960s and 70s. He takes those songs, chops them up, speeds them up, shifts their pitch until the voices sound high and almost unreal. He builds beats on top of that material, and the result is a sound that no one has heard before in quite that way. That technique, which others will call chipmunk soul, will become his signature, something that many will try to imitate but that no one will manage to replicate in exactly the same way. With those beats, he starts selling instrumentals to local rappers. His reputation grows in Chicago and then starts crossing borders. He produces for more established artists. His name begins to circulate in conversations that matter, and one day that name reaches New York and the ears of Jay-Z. Jay-Z listens. He gives him the opportunity to produce on his album. But he also makes one thing clear. As a rapper, he does not have what it takes. Coming from Jay-Z, that is not a casual comment. It is almost a verdict, but Kanye does not accept it. He pitches an idea for the album, something built around I Want You Back by the Jackson 5, and the result leaves Jay-Z speechless. Izzo, H-O-V-A, is born, one of the most iconic songs on the Blueprint. The album debuts at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Jay-Z becomes cemented as a legend, and Kanye, who until that moment was an interesting name, becomes an indispensable presence in the industry. His phone does not stop ringing. He starts appearing in the credits of the most successful albums of the moment. He is everywhere. But inside, something unsettles him. Producing for others does not fulfill him. He wants to rap his own songs, tell his own story, be the protagonist and not the invisible architect behind other people's protagonists. He asks for opportunities. Record labels listen to him politely and send him out the door with the same answer. You're a producer, not a rapper. Your voice doesn't work. Your image doesn't fit. You're not what people want to hear. Kanye hears those words, goes back to his studio, and keeps working. One night, exhausted after a long session, he falls asleep at the wheel. The car he is driving veers off the road and crashes head-on into another vehicle. The impact is brutal. Kanye survives, but his jaw is fractured in 3 places. Doctors wire it shut. He cannot speak properly. He cannot eat solid food. For weeks, he lives with his face swollen and his mouth almost sealed. Anyone would have interpreted that as a sign to stop, to rest, to wait for the right moment. 2 weeks after the accident, still with the wires in his jaw, Kanye returns to the studio. And what he records there, in that physically deplorable condition, becomes Through the Wire, a song where he raps literally with his jaw wired shut, where his voice sounds strange and the pain is palpable, and where he says everything he feels in that moment without filters and without mercy. The song is released without label backing. It begins to circulate on mixtapes and on the internet. And something happens. People listen. People react. Something in that voice, in that story, in that completely unrehearsed vulnerability touches those who hear it in a way that calculated music cannot touch. Finally, Rockefeller Records gives in. They give him a chance. Kanye gets to work on his first album with the same intensity he puts into everything. The result is The College Dropout, an album that from its very title is already a statement. It is an act of social criticism wrapped in soul samples and flawless beats. It questions the education system, the cult of appearances, consumerism, and the expectations society places on young people. There are songs about faith, about money, about family. There is humor and there is pain. There is arrogance and there is a vulnerability that disarms. The album debuts at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and wins 3 Grammy Awards. Critics call it one of the great works of hip-hop. And Kanye, who for years heard he was not enough of a rapper, is suddenly at the center of the cultural conversation. But success has a side effect that very few people talk about. As fame grows, so does the pressure of living up to it. And in Kanye's case, who from childhood was raised with the conviction that he was special, that pressure becomes an almost physical need to prove it over and over again. The controversial statements begin to pile up. He appears at public events with a confidence that many interpret as arrogance. He interrupts occasions. He makes comments that irritate those around him. The world begins to see 2 versions of him: the irrefutably brilliant artist and the publicly insufferable persona. With late registration, his second album, he consolidates his position. Then comes Graduation, which in its release week competes directly with 50 Cent in a commercial duel that the entire industry watches closely. Kanye wins. He sells more records in a week than his rival, and in the process, changes the conversation about what kind of rap can dominate the charts. He is at the top, and then comes the blow that no amount of success can protect against. In November 2007, Donda West dies from complications related to a cosmetic surgery she had undergone days earlier. She is 58 years old. For Kanye, losing his mother is devastating in a way that has no bottom. She was his foundation, his mirror, his first listener, and his most faithful believer. The person who convinced him he was right when the world was telling him he was wrong. What he creates in the wake of her death says everything he cannot express in ordinary words. 808s and Heartbreak is a cold, stripped-down album, almost clinical in its sadness. He uses auto-tune not to sound perfect, but to sound distant, as if the pain is so great that the normal human voice is not enough to contain it. At the time, many do not know what to do with that album. It is too strange, too different, too sad for the Kanye they expected. But over the years, it will come to be understood that that album profoundly influenced an entire generation of artists. Drake, The Weeknd, Frank Ocean, Kid Cudi, and dozens more found in that record a permission to make music that was more vulnerable, more experimental, and more personal. Kanye keeps working. With My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, he reaches perhaps the most ambitious work of his career, an album that several specialized critics will place among the greatest albums of all time. With Jesus, he explores sonic territories that deliberately make people uncomfortable. With The Life of Pablo, he constructs something that seems on the verge of falling apart at any moment but somehow stays standing. As the music moves forward, his personal life becomes complicated in ways that begin to worry those close to him. He marries Kim Kardashian in 2014 and together they have 4 children. For a moment, from the outside, the image is of someone who has it all: the music, the success, the family, the respect. But there are signs that, seen in hindsight, indicate that something is not right. The episodes intensify. The public outbursts become more frequent and more unpredictable. There are concerts abruptly cancelled. There are statements that leave everyone speechless. There are moments where Kanye says things that do not seem like those of someone who is well, things that lack coherence, that seem to come from a very dark or very distant place from reality. In 2018, there is a moment that shakes much of the public that had been following him. Kanye, in an interview, suggests that the enslavement of Africans in America was a choice, that 400 years of slavery could not have lasted that long if there had not been some degree of choice on the part of the enslaved. The reactions are immediate and devastating. Many of his colleagues and collaborators publicly contradict him. Figures from the African American community criticize him harshly. Others simply distance themselves in silence. That same year, he releases a series of albums in a very short period of time, as if he cannot stop himself, as if music is the only way to keep the chaos under control. He becomes politically involved with Donald Trump in a way that confuses those who know him, wearing the red campaign hat, visiting the White House, declaring that Trump is his brother. In 2020, he announces he is running for President of the United States. Not as an artistic gesture, not as a conceptual joke. He announces it as something real, securing delegates in several states, giving speeches at campaign events, crying in front of his supporters as he talks about his daughter. The candidacy goes nowhere, but the image of Kanye crying on a stage while speaking about having considered aborting his eldest daughter stays lodged in the collective memory as one of the most disturbing moments of that already deeply disturbing political year. His relationship with Kim fractures. They divorce in 2021. And what follows after the divorce is an escalation that many describe outright as a crisis. Kanye harasses Kim on social media in a public and sustained manner. He criticizes Pete Davidson, her new partner, in ways that go beyond rivalry or jealousy and enter territory that experts in gender-based violence describe as systematic harassment. And then there are the anti-Semitic statements. In 2022, Kanye makes a series of publicly anti-Semitic remarks that lead him to lose almost everything he had left in the business world. Adidas ends its collaboration with Yeezy, the sneaker line that at its peak was worth billions of dollars. Gap, Balenciaga, his talent agency, his music distributor. One after another, the contracts fall. Forbes magazine estimates that within a matter of days he loses nearly half his paper fortune. He also sells shirts printed with swastikas, which completes his burial in the public imagination as someone who has not only said wrong things, but is actively promoting ideas that the civilized world deemed unacceptable decades ago. During that same period, images emerge of Kanye living inside the Moda Center Stadium in Portland, Oregon, during the construction of one of his projects. The man who was once synonymous with opulence and success is literally sleeping in an empty stadium. The question that everyone asks aloud or in silence is always the same. What happened to him? There is an answer that has been known for some years. In 2016, following an emergency hospitalization, Kanye receives a diagnosis: bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a mental condition characterized by alternating episodes of mania and depression. During manic episodes, the person experiences euphoria, grandiosity, extreme impulsivity, overwhelming energy, and a reduced capacity to gauge the consequences of their actions. During depressive episodes, the opposite: paralysis, profound sadness, an inability to function normally. When that diagnosis becomes public, many of the things Kanye had done begin to be seen in a different light. The public outbursts, the grandiose declarations, the impossible projects announced and abandoned, the energy that drove him to work for days without sleeping and then left him unable to move. All of it takes on new meaning when it is understood that behind it was a condition that was not being properly treated, or that he himself resisted treating because he felt that the medication extinguished something in him that he considered essential. But in January 2026, something more arrives. A lengthy post, written by Kanye himself, that circulates on his social media and in a matter of hours generates millions of reactions. In it, Kanye speaks of something he had not previously mentioned publicly with such clarity. The car accident of his youth, the one that inspired him to write "Through the Wire," may have caused a traumatic brain injury that went undetected and untreated for decades. What Kanye describes in that post has a medical logic that several specialists, upon reading it, take seriously. An injury to the frontal lobe of the brain, depending on its severity, can affect impulse control, emotional regulation, the ability to gauge the social consequences of one's own actions, and the ability to filter what is said before saying it. Not completely, not always, but in ways that over time can accumulate and amplify, especially under conditions of extreme stress. And if there is one thing that defines the life of Kanye West from his first album to his latest scandal, it is extreme stress. The death of his mother, the divorces, the legal battles, the loss of multi-million-dollar contracts, the pressure of being simultaneously a musical genius and a public figure that the world demands be consistent and predictable. That does not mean that everything Kanye has said or done has a medical excuse. There are things he said that are wrong, regardless of any diagnosis. There are people he hurt in ways that no condition entirely justifies. There are responsibilities that remain his own. But it does mean that the story is more complicated than the headlines allow us to see. That behind the persona the world calls crazy or genius, there is a human being who from his early 20s lived with something inside his head that no one knew how to name until much later. In that same 2026 post, Kanye says he is in treatment, that he is trying to rebuild his relationship with his children, that he is working on new music, that he wants to apologize to the people he hurt. He does not know whether those people will want to hear him. He does not know whether the world is ready to see him differently, but he says he needed to say it. The story of Kanye West is the story of one of the most important musicians of the century. That is not in dispute. The College Dropout, Late Registration, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, 808th and Heartbreak, Jesus. Each of those albums changed something in popular music. Each one opened a door that others later walked through. Each one demonstrates that there is a talent that survives even all the mistakes. But it is also the story of someone who from a very young age carried more than any person should have to carry without help, and who found in arrogance and in noise a way of protecting himself from something he did not know how to name. And in the end, when you put it all together, when you see the complete arc from that child in Atlanta to the man in the empty stadium, from Donda pushing him to believe in himself to Kanye crying in front of a camera with no one able to stop him, the question is no longer what happened to Kanye West. The question is how he made it this far, carrying so much.